Welcome to The Thriving Marriage, the podcast for those who want to get their spouse back in love with them and truly thrive.
You'll learn why 95% of people don't save their marriage and the secret method no one else is talking about that will change everything for you. Are you ready? Let's turn tragedy to triumph.
Here are your hosts, international marriage experts, Marc Johnston and Heather Choate.
Welcome, everyone, to the Thriving Marriage Podcast. I'm Heather Choate with Marc Johnston. How are you doing, Marc?
I'm doing great.
All right. So today we're going to talk about sexual intimacy during separation and affairs, yes or no. And this was requested by several members here on the Thriving Marriage Facebook group. So thank you for giving us your feedback and requesting this topic. We know that if some people are thinking about it, then probably a lot of people are wondering the same thing. And so we always want to give you guys value with where you are at. So if you have a topic that you'd like for us to cover in the future or a specific question, go ahead and join the Thriving Marriage Facebook group and reach out to us and let us know what that is. And we'd be happy to include it in the future.
Yeah, we love actually hearing from you guys, and we like the feedback. We actually want to answer the questions that you all have, and that's, exactly what we're doing here. So if you want something answered and you feel like here's this big question that you have, we would love to do it on one of our future podcasts. Please let us know.
Yeah. Awesome. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But before we do, we're going to share our client win of the week. Yes. This one comes from our Reboot member, which is one of our courses, the Relationship Reboot course. They asked to remain anonymous, which is totally cool. But they just posted this huge win. They say, big win. We've been in reconciliation since February, and here we are in April 2021. Oh my goodness, I skipped a year.
It is 2021 now. We were able to put 2020 behind us a few months ago. I don't know if you heard.
2020 loop, I guess. All right, anyway, he says this weekend, or she says this weekend, he put his wedding ring back on. It's been on his bedside table since he took it off September 2019. So it gives you a bit of perspective there. She says, it's odd seeing it on his hand, but he wants to wear it. It's back on. So
I find this one interesting, because it seems like they were going through some problems for quite some time, since September 2019.
Yeah, it's a long time for a ring to be sitting on a table. My toddlers have followed it by now.
I don't know. I hear a lot of people who ask us this kind of question, okay, well, it's been some years since we've been separated or since we've been having problems. Is this salvageable? And I like this sort of example here because it does demonstrate that. It demonstrates that, even if things have been a bit stagnant or problematic for quite some time, it's possible to turn it around.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what we're here to help people do. So if you're new to the podcast, I encourage you guys to go back, listen to some of our earlier, more foundational podcasts going over our PATH method. Today, we're going to go deep into a very specific issue. And we kind of like to mix it up, but again, always listening to what you guys want. So sometimes we go really high level overview, like what it takes to save a marriage, how to stop a divorce, how to end an affair, and we go over the high level steps that it takes to do that. Today, we're going into more of a specific topic and a specific challenge. However, I'm sure that the principles that we're going to share today, specifically Marc is going to share a lot about this, can also apply to other areas. So as you're listening to this, think about what your challenges might be and how this could apply to your relationship so that you get a breakthrough, especially if you're like our student here that has been working for several years to save their marriage and now is seeing some results by applying these things. Mm-hmm. All right. So Marc, ready to jump in?
Yeah. So back to the question, sexual, do you have sex with your partner during separation or affairs? Yes or no? And I will give the answer right now. I'm going to say yes and no. It's not, yes. It's conclusive. We're done. We're done with the podcast, right? You have your answer.
It's very helpful.
Great. Very helpful. Wonderful. No, I'll explain that a little bit. I do think that this is a very personal question, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer that will fit every situation. I think there's a lot of factors that go into this decision, and that's actually what I wanted to go over today, is what factors do I look at? If a client came to me and was asking this question, what kind of things would I really want to help them to consider to make this decision for themselves?
Yes, and I've heard them come to you and ask this exact question.
Oh, so no, this question comes up all the time, Heather. Yeah. All the time. I even though we do run, within our program, we have group sessions, and sometimes, people hear other members' struggles, and, they get to hear questions from other people. I still, even in those group sessions, I probably hear this question about once a month or so. And, I'm not even in all of those group sessions. So I imagine it probably comes up even more than that. We have those group sessions running just about, every day of the work week. And so lots of support there. And it's just, I'm sure it comes up even when I'm not there. So Heather, we're going to talk about some factors here. The first one, I think the first question that I like to look at is, how committed to the marriage is the person stepping away? I kind of assume that if someone is asking me this question, they want the relationship to go well. They're committed to that relationship. But how committed is the other person who is looking at separation or perhaps engaging in an affair? And you might hear that question, you might say, well, obviously they're not really committed, but I think there's a large spectrum of commitment even in this situation. We see, Heather, you and I see situations where, the person might be exploring separation. They might say, I want to see what this is like. They might say, I just need a break from the relationship, but I still want to see how we can put this back together. If they're engaged in an affair, maybe they're keeping the affair secret. Maybe they don't want it to actually damage the relationship. Maybe they're really sorrowful or feel a lot of guilt about committing that affair. That's a very different situation than if the partner is really checked out. They don't want anything to do with the marriage anymore. They're fully committed into another relationship and really pursuing that. That's a very different situation in terms of whether you want to really engage in that deep level of intimacy. So you kind of have to look at your partner and kind of evaluate this for yourself. So Heather, I think some of our clients are even a little bit confused, though, as to how committed they might be in this sort of situation. Do you have any thoughts on perhaps how to tell if they're a little bit more committed, if they are a little bit more repentant? You can turn that back to me if you don't have anything immediate, but I just want to hear your thoughts a little bit.
Well, I think part of the confusion comes because we tend to focus on the surface level, right? On what they're saying, on what they're doing, and not really understanding what's driving those behaviors. And one thing that we really focus on with the coaching that we do here is that we focus on those root issues that are driving that behavior. Yes. And that's always crucial with the path method, is getting a perspective of where they're coming from. And here's where most people get it wrong, is because it hurts when they want a separation, and it hurts when they're having an affair. And we can't really see beyond our own emotional states to understanding where the other person is coming from. And so when we really understand where they're coming from, then we can really assess their commitment to the marriage, kind of cutting away all of that surface level pain and surface level behavior to see what's really underneath. And then when we see what's underneath, why they might be having an affair. I don't feel like I'm appreciated in the marriage, or I don't feel like I'm connected to you, right? Anything like that. But you realize that if they had that connection with you, or they felt appreciation, then their commitment is absolutely there. They're just really struggling with something that's going on. And yeah, they're not doing it in a healthy way by any means. We never say that having an affair or going outside the marriage to get needs met is the right way to do it. But when you understand why they're doing what they're doing, and then you realize, okay, this is very savable. This is very doable. And that they are really committed. They're struggling though. And so that's what we need to solve. So.
I think that's an excellent point, Heather, because it's a very different situation if they were saying, I'm really hesitant about this relationship because I don't feel loved. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a scenario where you would really want to consider what it would take to make sexual intimacy happen and make it feel healthy. If you really put the brakes on that when they are feeling really hesitant themselves, I think that's going to be a situation you really need to consider, because it may end up driving them further. It's going to be reinforcing this story that I'm rejected, I'm not loved, I'm not wanted. Right. And it all comes about exactly what you're saying, from taking some time to put aside perhaps some of your own pain for a moment and say, okay, well, what's really going on? Can I gain some better perspective about why this really painful behavior is happening?
Which is really hard to do ourselves. Why we need the outside perspective to guide us on that and give us some of that, clarity that we just can't see for ourselves. It's like, I always talk about like the doctor analogy, right? But if we've got a bleeding neck, we might not know what's causing it and what the root issue is, but the doctors and the experts that know and see this all the time will be able to help give us that clarity on what's going on there. So that's really important for sure. And just like seeing, are they repentant? Are they wanting to change? Are they sorrowful? Are they wanting to work things out? If you hear that or sense that from them, obviously they're going to have a level of commitment there versus, I'm not sorry, I don't want to change, I don't want to come back, right? And then are they asking, how can we fix this? How could we work this out? Or, anything like that. So I think, Marc, as you said here, like intention is really important at this stage. Why is that intention so important to understand here?
Well, I think this is the easier part to evaluate if they're directly talking about this. If they're saying, I'm sorry, I want this, I'm really wanting to explore whether this is working. But like, this makes the difference in, determining, okay, do I consider continuing to have sex with my partner if they're, if their intention is to go further away from the relationship, that should really play into your decision. And generally, I'm going to say, hey, if their intention is to move further away, but they're still wanting to have sex with you, I mean, we're going to get into like that sort of dynamic in a bit, but that should really cause you to pause a little bit and really think about this. You guys are going to hear the train. It's always around this time. It should really cause you to pause and consider whether this is really good for you.
Yeah, which goes into the next point here, beyond commitment to the marriage, both on your side and their side, asking yourself, does this feel healthy to you? That's a really important piece. I've seen many clients struggle with this. I've mostly seen women, I'm just going to say that for now, that their husband is having an affair and then still wants to come home and be sexually intimate with them. And they're trying to figure out, how do I handle this? It doesn't feel really good that he can go and be with her and then come home and be with me, right? And so that's a very specific situation that needs to be handled carefully as well. So how do we help clients sift through all those emotions and decisions to figure out if it feels healthy, and why is it important that it feels healthy?
So I do want to just comment a little bit on what you said there. And I really dislike, talking about stereotypes for men and women, but I was racking my brain for any sort of example where I saw the opposite, where
me too.
Any sort of what?
Not that it's not out there. I just haven't seen it in all of our years of doing this. That doesn't mean it is not.
Like where the wife or the woman is stepping away and then wanting to come back to the relationship and engage in sexual intimacy. Yeah, it doesn't happen. The only instance where I can see that that's happening is where the wife might be engaging in an affair on the side and they haven't really made a decision yet. Um, but almost, I do see it a lot more with the husbands and the men. And I wanted to explain that for a second. We could easily say, well, men, right? You're speaking as a man. But I think when you understand the dynamic, I think it makes a little bit more sense. The tendency that I see is that men tend to approach sex as a way to explore feeling close to a person. They might not admit that readily. They might say, well, it's something that I enjoy. I think that's being a little bit disingenuous, or unless they're in a really unhealthy place. Whereas I tend to see women tend to approach sex as a result of feeling close to someone. And so I don't think necessarily, we don't want to label either one as necessarily wrong. I think they're just different ways to approach that sort of connection and intimacy. And this is why we see that difference. And so like men who are approaching, having an affair and still approaching the marriage wanting to have sex, it's usually because of that. They're like, okay, I'm trying to explore feeling connected with this person in some way. I'm either wanting to feel connection, or I'm trying to figure out, can I feel connection? And that's why this is going on. But anyways, back to the question of like, does this feel healthy? I will say that for it to really feel deeply healthy, sexual intimacy, it requires mutual respect and consideration. I have seen many times, and this does tend to be the women, because it's the men who are trying to explore this connection, and the women are like, okay, well, I want to draw my husband back in. And they end up doing that, and then I've heard them explain to me, it just feels a bit yucky. It doesn't feel good. And it's because ultimately it comes down to this woman not feeling respected or considered. They're saying, oh, well, here's my husband who's saying he's not sure he wants the marriage. He might be engaging in this affair. What about me? And it's a good question to ask.
Right.
I mean, this level of intimacy, it requires an ability to be vulnerable to a deep level and very open with another person. So you need to be asking yourself, okay, do you feel like you have respect, safety, and like as an ability to be vulnerable, an ability to be open with this person? And I think that plays a really large factor into your decision. I think there's a lot of people, even women, who can say, hey, you know what, I just want to feel somewhat close to my partner, and these things aren't as important. There's a decent population like that, and that's fine. That's why you need to ask yourself, does this feel healthy to you? Do you have an adequate amount of respect, vulnerability, and openness for this to feel okay? I think another factor that you need to look at, and this is where I come into that male side, do you both desire to explore having more respect, safety, and openness? And I think that's more where the male part of this is coming in. If they are kind of bouncing back and forth, is they're kind of looking to have more of that. And if you can recognize that, I think that's also another thing to consider strongly. Like, does this feel healthy to you? Do people want to explore having more connection and openness and respect? Now, last question on this thing, and that I really want to explore with some depth. What do you need, if you're not getting that, what do you need to ask for from the situation to then make it healthy?
Yes, I love that. That is an empowering question.
Yeah.
That is not victimhood right there. Okay, that's some awareness, and that's some vision. It's some focus on what you want, and it's some empowerment of knowing this is what I deserve, this is what I need in this aspect of our relationship with sexual intimacy. What do we need to do to make this healthy? You approach it like that and work together as a team. That's when the magic really happens. That's when we're able to really see some reconciliation.
I do see a lot of, and once again, in these matters, it does tend to be the women who are like, well, it doesn't feel good, but I want to draw my partner back in, and they just kind of feel stuck. And they're just like, here's, like you said, there's that kind of victim mentality. Like, I have to make this sacrifice in order to draw my husband back in again. And that's not healthy. You might say, well, I need to make the sacrifice for the relationship. And I'm going to call you out on that and say that for the relationship's health, it's not good either.
Right.
If you're building up, if you're trying to make these sacrifices like fundamental, foundational pieces of your relationship in order to appease someone else, it's not going to go well. And it's much better. Your partner, it will feel much more stable to them if they feel like you are respecting yourself and what you need in order to provide what they're looking for. I want you to like imagine the scenario if your partner was saying, okay, I have to have this, this, and this, and you're like, okay. I see time and time again when like people just give in and give in and give in, and they say they're making changes. There's kind of the sense that changes are not real, and there's some amount of mistrust in those changes, and I see it especially in this sort of arena. So like, hey, we've now opened up and are having more frequent or better sex, and then the partner's like, I just don't think it's going to last, and I don't think it's going to change permanently, at least.
Right.
And this factor right here is what makes the difference there. Is if if you as as an individual are saying, I would love to provide this, and this is what I need to feel supported in providing this. This is a scenario where it's going to feel much more stable, much more genuine, and you're going to have a stronger foundation. And that if you have all that, then great. This is something, once again, that's going to impact your decision about whether you want to decide to continue having sexual intimacy with your partner.
Right. Can I share a client story, but keep it anonymous, of course?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I remember several years ago, I'll call her Casey, but she was in a very similar situation to what we've been describing. Her husband was having an affair, sexual affair with another woman. And I don't remember if it was a coworker, but doesn't really matter. But she felt that for the sake of the relationship, she still needed to have sex with him whenever he came home, and he would live with the other woman for a few days and then come home to her house for a few days. And she never knew when he was going to be around. She never knew when he was going to show up for their child. I believe they had a son. Details are a little fuzzy because it's been a few years, but I know they had a child, and never knew if he was going to be around for them, or, if he was going to be there for dinner or what, right? And so she felt like she just had to continue to give and give and give, because if she didn't provide, sexual intimacy or anything else that he wanted, then he was definitely going to go to the other woman. And I have a lot of compassion for those in this situation. Mark and I have seen it many, many, many times. And we understand the confusion there. In fact, I understand that it can be confusing even when we say, you got to meet their needs, right? Try to meet their needs. So they want to get drawn back to you. But this is where there's just a lot of confusion, and you really need specific guidance for your situation so it doesn't backfire. In this instance, it's completely backfiring. She didn't feel good about it. She felt yucky. She felt like it was like she was just a doormat, right? He could walk all over her. No self-respect for herself. And definitely did not feel like he respected her in any way there. And so I remember, Mark, you working with her and saying, you need to have a healthy boundary here and let him know that this isn't okay. You're worried about STDs. You don't really know what he's doing. This is just causing a lot of fear, and you're not feeling good about yourself. And so this is a time when we definitely need to empower yourself and say, this is not okay. And here's what I need to do to make it healthy, because I want it to be okay in the future. And it was exactly that question there. going to him and saying, this is what I need to do for this to be healthy. I need you to not be having sex with anyone else. I need to know when you're going to be home. I need to know that you want to be there with me and my son, right? And whatever else she came up with. And she wanted him to get tested, I believe, for STDs because she didn't want that in her life. And so that's where she was able to draw some healthy boundaries. And with that, she just, you could just feel the difference in her confidence, in her level of self-respect. And that it was a huge wake-up call to him when she finally said, nope, no more. I want to work on this with you, but this is how it needs to be for it to work for both of us. And that is how you build the foundation of a healthy relationship. So, Marc, let's talk a little bit about, how sex will feel really empty if you're just doing it to appease them. What have you seen as far as that goes?
Yeah, so exactly what you're talking about. Okay, so here is the stereotypical, we're talking about stereotypes. Stereotypical male who is bouncing back and forth and really trying to explore feeling connected. Now, if you then, and this could be, we're saying stereotypical, but these roles can switch around. But if you are simply doing this to appease your partner, newsflash here, they're going to pick up on that. And it's going to, they're going to, even if you are putting on a really great show and saying, yeah, this is great and I want to be with you, and chances are your partner knows you pretty well and can tell when you're not really being genuine. And if there's some amount of underlying resentment, I have people tell me all the time, well, I don't let that show at all when I'm interacting with my husband or wife, and I'm just going to call BS on that. It's just, I don't know, Heather, do you ever get Ben, you can tell something's wrong with Ben even though we say, no, everything's fine.
Oh, absolutely. And vice versa.
Oh, yeah.
It's hey, honey, how was your day? Fine. I mean, even if I'm like, oh, it's fine. Yeah.
Even if for me, if Jen is like, oh yeah, everything's fine, and she's trying to make it appear fine, and I know her well enough, and to know that is not really true. And the same, you take that and you magnify it into a situation like having sex. People can tell, even if you think you're a really great actor. I'm sorry, you're not.
Yeah.
You're probably not.
And what happens is that even your effort there of trying to have connection with this person, having sex with them is just going to feel empty. It's not going to feel genuine. It's not going to really build that connection that you're going for.
Exactly. So then as your partner might be trying to explore this with you and trying to feel that connection, and you're feeling empty and resentful, what's going to happen? They're going to be like, well, I guess I don't have this connection with you.
Right. It's going to feed more into the story. We talk a lot about the story here.
Yes.
Uncovering their story and not giving, any more fuel to that story, but showing them the truth of who you really are and the new story that they can be happy. Genuinely, both of you can be happy together. So yeah,
if you want to draw your partner in by having sex with them, then it needs to feel healthy for you. Otherwise, it's going to backfire. It's going to drive them further away.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hope that's clear to everyone. And again, if you're having questions or struggling with that, please reach out to us and we can help guide you through whatever the specific situation is for you. Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about level of intimacy and closeness, okay? It has to do with separation and affairs and having sexual intimacy.
Yeah. I think we've been kind of covering this a little bit, but this is still something to consider. We've been kind of touching on this factor on some of the other questions, but this is really about, okay, is there emotion, is there a sense of closeness during sex? Because I will see quite frequently this point of separation, and then the two partners come together to have sex, and they're like, I did this, and my husband or wife, it just seems much more mechanical, and it seemed like they weren't really present. It didn't seem like it was the same at all as previously when we were doing really well together. And I will say that, just straight off the bat, if it's feeling really empty like that and there's this lack of emotion or closeness, there's probably some amount of a lack of respect. There's probably more of a view of like, I'm going to do this because I have a physical need. They're probably trying to guard themselves emotionally. And if those things are going on, I don't think that it's, just in the terms of patching the relationship back together, I don't think it's going to be doing any favors. I don't think it's going to be doing much at all.
In and of itself, right?
Yeah. I think the bigger question is then, why is this partner, or why are you engaging in sex without emotion? Why is that happening?
Yeah, it's a symptom of a deeper issue. And that question right there is going to strike you where it hurts. If it's you, or strike your partner where they maybe don't want to be vulnerable, but that's what we need to do, is peel back those layers to help heal what's really going on underneath the surface.
It's a really odd thing where, because even, like I said, and this tends to be more men, even though they might not want to admit it, and I'm saying they as though I'm not one of them, even though men might not want to admit it, there is a sense of wanting to feel close, wanting to feel connected to someone through sex. And so there's this weird dynamic going on if they are very guarded emotionally, but seeking some closeness. And there's a huge discrepancy between that. And I think it's worth examining. Now, likely, if this is going on, that partner probably doesn't want to explore this, or they probably don't feel comfortable exploring this. But
right.
Yeah.
Which is why we need to then, go through the rest of the path process and uncover how to draw them to us, so they do feel open and safe, and we can resolve some of these things.
Oh yeah, even approaching the subject. Yeah, approaching the subject is a whole other can of worms, and building up the sort of closeness or safety to explore this, a whole other topic there. And I that's what I kind of like about exploring relationships. This is, I thought maybe after years of working on this and doing these podcasts that I might run out of topics to explore, but Heather, we really haven't. And this can go as deep as you would like it to go. And I still feel like, even though I've been doing nothing but researching relationships and helping people with relationships for years now, how we've been doing this, it's been 5 or 6 years?
5 years, 5.5.
I still find that I'm learning new things. But anyways, this right here is, there's a really interesting dynamic between wanting to explore that connection and feeling really guarded against it. And it's worth looking at. If you don't have that, then that should impact whether you want to proceed in that kind of sexual intimacy.
Right. So to kind of sum it all up here, ultimately the decision is up to you. We talked about both ends of the spectrum, where engaging in sexual intimacy would absolutely backfire. It would not feel healthy. It would not draw you closer together. And then there's the other side of the spectrum, where not having physical intimacy, sexual intimacy, would also backfire. It would actually push them further away. And there's every single situation in between those two as well. So the decision is up to you, right? So Marc, how can we kind of help people that are in these situations and anywhere along the spectrum, guide them on what decision is going to be right for them, so they can make a decision that feels good?
I always think it's a really good idea to talk to a neutral third-party professional. I'm not just saying that because, hey, look, we have a business here. Like, even me, I'm not ashamed to admit, like, my wife and I are talking to a professional right now, not because we're doing bad, but we want to make our relationship even better. And it's just, it's good to have someone else, kind of examine the situation, talk with us, and have an outside perspective on, what can we do to grow even closer together. And so I do think that if this is confusing at all to you, even if it's not, actually, I would even say even if it's not confusing, this is just a tricky situation, and you might want to examine, are you thinking about it too simply? I think having someone who really knows the ins and outs of relationships is a really big benefit to have, no matter where you are in the spectrum, especially if there are some problems. But yeah, ultimately, I'm not going to tell you what to do. If you really want to get it on with your partner and you're not in the best place, well, by all means, go ahead. I'm not going to tell you no.
So yeah, you choose whatever you want. But if it does not build up the relationship, and that's what you're wanting, if it does not build up a stronger foundation, without those things, then you might want to pay attention to that.
Yes. There is something to be learned there. Absolutely. If you haven't figured that out, what you need to learn there, then yeah, once again, go to a professional. Come to us. We know what we're talking about. I think. I don't know. I like to think that I do.
Well, yes. We've been able to help tens of thousands of students now around the world. And so it's awesome. And you're not alone if you're going through this. Exactly. All right. Any final thoughts on sexual intimacy during separation or affairs, Mark?
Just a kind of final thought. Like if none of this really matters, if it's not building up the relationship, if it's not building up a stronger foundation, if none of this really matters to you, then go ahead. Like you said, though, if you need to ask yourself, why are you willing? Like, if this doesn't matter, why are you willing to continue to have sex with this person if commitment, respect, and intimacy are no longer important? And like I said, I'm not trying to shame anyone. It's simply an important question for you to explore individually. Like, if this doesn't matter to you, why are you continuing to engage sexually with this person?
Valid question.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark. And now let's go over to our marriage myth buster. Mm-hmm. This one's curious to me. I'll admit I'm a little naive to what this is, so I'm excited to learn with everyone else. Marriages benefit from a relationship contract. So what is a relationship contract, and how is this true or not true?
Actually, I was thinking of, my first thought was a relationship contract as in like, getting married and having something like that. And then I thought for a second, no, actually, I've heard of other relationship contracts. I actually had to look it up because I wasn't super familiar with the term, simply because I think it's not like the kind of person that I am where I have to write everything down and say, okay, you and I are going to have, these expectations and we're going to sign on this. So if, in case you are not aware, like I wasn't, like, even though I deal with relationships all the time, I wasn't aware of this. But this is the thing, Heather. So relationship contract is where you write down a number of expectations for the relationship and have some sort of, the level of formality is up to you, but, sometimes you sign it, sometimes you don't. But like, as an example, it outlines certain expectations like who is in charge of what chores, how you handle arguments in the relationship, or the expectation maybe to have family dinners on Sunday, or whatever it happens to be. It's basically an outline of expectations within a relationship. Now, personally, I think relationship contracts, this myth, quote unquote, this idea is actually true in a number of ways. In some cases, it can be very beneficial if approached in the right way. So if they are approached dogmatically, or with a lot of rigidity, or with a sense of control, then this is an unhealthy sort of situation. Like if it keeps coming back to like, we agreed to this and you didn't fulfill your part of the agreement, well, then that's not a really healthy way of approaching this. But if the contract is agreed upon mutually and there's room to discuss and amend the contract, And if there's an ability to have some understanding and support in fulfilling the contract, and fulfilling those expectations, then this has the potential of clearing up a lot of problems within a relationship. Because I do think that a lot of problems are caused by unspoken expectations, unclear expectations, I would say. Right. Now, we can actually extend this further into the basic relationship contract of marriage, because it's another form of the relationship contract. It's just one that a lot more of us are familiar with. This expectation to stay together and remain faithful. I do think that it touches on this myth of people going into a relationship and saying, okay, well, and this is especially more true these days. They go into a relationship and say, marriage, it's only a piece of paper. It's not that important to actually be married. It doesn't really mean anything. That piece of paper doesn't mean anything because we love each other. Now, to a certain extent, this is true, in that greater commitment doesn't really come from the piece of paper. It generally comes about from how enjoyable the relationship is, and that's because it's basically, like other types of marriage contracts, you can approach this relationship with a sense that everyone is on the same page and is committed to maintaining it. So in a sense, it's good, but without clear communication, it becomes easy to veer away from this. Now, all this comes about because there are basically two types of commitment. There's a structural commitment, and there's personal commitment in relationships. Personal commitment is that side of things where you say, oh, all we need is love. We don't need the piece of paper. It's, I really love you and I enjoy this, and that's why I'm committed. We don't need a piece of paper to tell us that. Whereas structural commitment are all those pieces of life that tie you together, bind you together, but aren't really actually part of the direct relationship. This is the piece of paper. This is having children together. This is time together. This is shared finances. This is all those things that
religious, spiritual beliefs as well.
And so, some people include a third type of commitment in terms of moral commitment. Yeah. And so I would factor things like that, religious beliefs under that. If we're going away with that, I would actually consider that more under the personal commitment, because like if I have a moral obligation, that's me. There's nothing outside of the relationship that's really maintaining that. But you're right in that those religious commitments do play a factor.
What about cultural expectations? Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't really matter where we're categorizing this. But what tends to be is that personal commitment ebbs and flows. If I am having a lot more, like if there's a lot more problems, if we're introducing a lot more stress, if we're having a lot more fights, my personal commitment is just naturally going to drop a little bit. I'm going to be less invested into the relationship. And so here's where this part of the relationship contract comes in. If I have these binding things, if I have the marriage certificate, if I have kids, if I have financial ties, if I have time together, my life is interwoven with this other person, the relationship remains more stable as the personal commitment ebbs and flows. It becomes more difficult to disentangle the two lives. And so it actually has a benefit for the relationship in being a little bit more long lasting, for it to feel more secure. And there's a lot of benefit just in how the relationship feels if it feels more secure. So I'm going to, there's that relationship contract side where it's kind of the loose expectations. And I do think that if you do it right, that's good. But on the other side, like the more formal marriage contract, I'm going to just tell people straight out that is, if you're saying that it's not important, I'm going to call BS on that. And it does keep relationships more stable and feeling more secure. So that structural commitment does have an important role, absolutely. So I don't know if we want to say the myth is busted, but it's explained here.
Yeah, it's clarified. But
yeah, it's clarified. And so, at least we can set that aside.
right. I think what it really comes down to, though, because a marriage contract, while the benefits could be that you have clearer expectations about things, it still could just be viewed as a piece of paper unless you are internally committed to the relationship. And that comes, from our choices, and it's always a choice. So no matter where you are in your relationship, knowing that you have a choice on the direction where it goes and that you have more influence than you even realize. Even if your spouse is saying, I want out, I'm in love with someone else, I don't want to be with you anymore, I want a divorce, I am not happy here, you never change, that can feel very disempowering to you, but you absolutely have an incredible influence on the relationship. So
exactly, you can build up that personal commitment as you make your interpersonal relationship feel more fulfilling.
Right, exactly. All right. Well, if you are struggling with any of these things or have a question for Marc or I, or want to reach out and learn about how our coaching might be able to help you in your relationship, just like our student at the beginning talked about their spouse being checked out since 2019 and they just put on their wedding ring, which is awesome. Go ahead and book a free call with us at highthrivecoaching.com/apply. And we'll do a free consultation with you guys, help uncover what those root issues are in your marriage so that we don't just deal with symptoms anymore, but that we have real lasting healing and change in your relationship. All right, next week, we're going to share with you, should I stay or should I go? Reminds me of that song.
Yeah, it's immediately what popped into my head.
Right. And what is right for your marriage? If you've asked that question aloud or internally, to other people, I don't know, should I stay, should I go? This podcast is going to help get you some clarity on that. Awesome. Thank you, Marc. Thanks everyone for joining.
See you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.